Baldwin, to have you to give us some information about your background, your education, and some of your experiences. And then by the beginning of the second segment, then we'll have an opportunity to get into an introduction to the so-called Black Lives Matter movement. Let's do it from that perspective.
Well, I'm a native of Camden, Alabama. I grew up there in Wilcox County, Alabama, which was called at that time the Alabama Black Belt. I attended schools in Wilcox County. I graduated from Camden Academy High School in 1967. And from that point, I matriculated at Talladega College in Talladega, Alabama, majored in history. 1971, I graduated with a BA degree in history. And from that point to Crozer Theological Seminary in Rochester, New York, where I received the MA and MDiv degrees. From that point, of course, to Northwestern University, where I received the PhD degree in 1980 in American Christianity. And from that point, of course, I've been involved in scholarship and teaching. I taught at Worcester College in Ohio, Colgate University in New York, and for 30 years I taught at Vanderbilt University here in Nashville.
And so, and also known Dr. Baldwin, I must say, as one of the most important individuals dealing with the scholarship of Dr. Martin Luther King. Even though today we're not going to talk specifically about Dr. Martin Luther King, we're going to talk about a movement that I didn't know that much about personally before we talked about it.
That was inspired by.
That was in a real sense inspired by Dr. Martin Luther King.
Exactly.
Let's see if we can, Dr. Baldwin, during this first few minutes during this segment, to have you to give us some understanding of the Black Lives Matter movement.
Well, the Black Lives Matter movement actually started in 2013 after the acquittal of George Zimmerman for the murder of Trayvon Martin. 3 black women, Alicia Garza, Patrice Cullors, and Oprah Tometi, decided that they would get together and start a movement that would deal with the intentional and systematic killing of young black men. And they said, well, hey, this is about black lives. So what we want to do is to go on social media and to sort of promote this idea that black men are being systematically and intentionally killed, not only by vigilantes, but also by police. So the movement started in 2013 after the acquittal of George Zimmerman. It blossomed in 2014 with the killing of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri. And since that time, of course, the movement has continued with the killing of Eric Garner, with the killing of Walter Scott in South Carolina, with the killing of Freddie Gray in Baltimore. So the Black Lives Matter movement is not only a slogan, it started out as a slogan. Some might say that it was a rallying cry, that it was a social media hashtag, but now it has become a movement with chapters in 23 chapters in the United States, Canada, and Ghana. And of course, since 2013, there have been more than 700 demonstrations in connection with that movement.
But you also, Dr. Baldwin, I think, can trace that movement, as I think you explained to me, way back into the civil rights movement, to the early parts of the civil rights movement. And so although it only started in 2013 in terms of being what you consider to be the contemporary Black Lives Matter movement, but you can also, it also has a history that started long before this. And
I think Black Lives Matter has always been a theme in the black freedom struggle. If you go back to the antebellum period with Frederick Douglass and Sojourner Truth and Harriet Tubman, they were all echoing this theme.
Okay, Dr. Baldwin, I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll take this first commercial break, and then we'll come back and we'll pick up on the history of the Black Lives Matter movement.
Okay.
And we'll be back with our audience following this very, very short commercial break. We're still
And then the last, where are we going from here?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so do you want to do some history about it? Because I think you were talking about
we want to go into the historical background of it.
Well, let's give we got to have about 8 minutes.
Better to talk about that.
Yeah, and then that last 10 minutes we can get into whatever else you wish to deal with.
Sounds great to me. Yeah. Yeah. This is fun.
Yeah, it's all laid out here. And see, this is some important pieces of tape that we're getting right here. Not only does it deal with the subject here.
Yeah, how do you put it in a larger context?
In a context, yeah, that's right.
Because I don't think a lot of people do that. Yeah, a lot of people do that.
Yeah, so we're getting ready for the second segment. And it goes like that, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It goes just like that. And this is one of 5, my first of 5 today.
Yeah.
So we'll be out of here about 2:30. Oprah does 1 a day, and I do 5.
You do 5 a day. You got other people.
Yeah, we got 5 more people to come in and occupy that seat.
Oh, man. Doc, you a busy man.
Thank you and welcome back to the second segment of the show for today. We're talking to Dr. LBaldwin, and he's giving us some information relative to the contemporary Black Lives Matter movement. And of course, Dr. Baldwin, I think that when we left, we promised that we would give you an opportunity to talk about the historical significance of the Black Lives Matter movement and how it started. Let's talk about it from that perspective.
Yes, I think we have to understand that although the movement started in 2013, after the murder of Trayvon Martin and the acquittal of George Zimmerman, we have to see that movement in a larger historical context. Black Lives Matter actually started in the pre-Civil War years. If you look at the speeches, the activities of Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman and Sojourner Truth, they were all echoing this theme, Black Lives Matter, in the late 19th century. John E. Bruce, Henry McNeil Turner, others were speaking to this same theme, Black Lives Matter, early 20th century. Ida B. Wells in her crusade against lynchings were talking about black lives and how they matter and how black bodies should be preserved. And so in the 1950s and 60s, you get Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. talking about the sacredness of human personality and black lives. So what you have with the Black Lives Matter movement today is a movement that represents, I think, a continuation of centuries of freedom struggle. It's a part of that unbroken tradition of black struggle. And so we have to understand it, I think, in that larger historical context. Although the movement started in 2013, it's a part.
That is the idea, and that's why you call it the contemporary Black Lives Matter movement, because it's really a continuation in a real sense, but it's now contemporary.
Yeah, it's contemporary. It's both contemporary and a continuation of this long history of struggle, and so we have to see it in those terms.
And all those individuals who were concerned about any deprivation against the black population, especially the male. Is there something that is peculiar, Dr. Baldwin, when we talk about this movement dealing with young African-American males? Why is it, where does a male fit into these movements?
I think it's really about vigilanteism. We know that Trayvon Martin was killed by a vigilante, and the movement started with an emphasis on that. But in time, it blossomed to include this idea of police misconduct and police brutality, which occurred, of course, in the case of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri. And later with Eric Garner in New York, with Jordan Davis, of course, you had vigilanteism in Florida with Jordan Davis. And of course you had others like Walter Scott in South Carolina, who was killed by a policeman, and Freddie Gray in Baltimore. So the movement is really focused on the killing of young black men, the intentional and systematic maiming and destruction of young black male lives. And interestingly enough, you have black women who are spearheading this movement. So that's what it's all about.
And when you look at this movement, Dr. Baldwin, and you think about the institution of slavery, I think you already mentioned that as part of the framework of the movement. When you look at this movement, it appears to me that the emphasis is on young African-American males, primarily because those are the most dangerous individuals dealing with the institution of slavery. That is, if slavery is to be overthrown, it is not the African-American female, nor the African-American older person, but it will be who? Those young African-American males. And so that's the group.
That's right. That group has always been vulnerable. It was vulnerable in the pre-Civil War years, the antebellum period, as we call it, vulnerable in the late 19th century, earlier 20th century, the civil rights movement, and even today. The systematic and intentional killing and maiming, destruction of young black men, I think, is the issue here with the Black Lives Matter movement. Not to negate the fact that black women are also victims. I think there are statistics that show that every 48 hours, some young black male, female, or child become the victim of what? Vigilante violence or police violence. So it's a movement about the sacredness of black life, about the value, the dignity of human life and black life more specifically. So it's not only about black males, but it is about black males. It's about black people and their right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
And I think that also, Dr. Baldwin, I'm reminded that there's such a real problem in terms of the economic situation of young African-American males.
Exactly.
I think that when you look at the statistics for today, you find that they represent a large element of the population whose unemployment is greater than any other area. And so not only is it the killing of African-American males, but it also has an aspect in terms of their economic deprivation and their social deprivation and et cetera.
That's an excellent question. And we often forget that when we go on social media and we check out the Black Lives Matter movement, we think it's only about racial profiling and police brutality and misconduct. It's also about poverty and economic injustice. They're very much concerned. Alicia Garza and others who are heading this movement are concerned about poverty and economic injustice, about teenage pregnancy, about incarceration rates in the black community. So it's a movement about the sacredness of black life, that black people must be concerned about black lives, that they must consider black lives sacred, and that the larger society and culture should also embrace this idea of the sacredness, the dignity and worth of black human personality. That's what it's about.
Very good. And so however you look at it, whether we're talking about the immediate destruction of black life, or whether we're talking about a slow destruction of black life through the inability for most individuals to get work and create a situation where they are always at one another's throats and et cetera, that's all part of it. The treatment, all a part of it, in a real sense, of the young African-American male.
Yes. It's not only about police brutality and racial profiling, it's about what happens internally in the black community, is that black people themselves must respect the sacredness of black life, which means, hey, we have to deal with black-on-black crime, as well as police brutality and misconduct, as well as vigilantism, which results in the deaths of black males. We must deal with all of these issues.
And of course, Dr. Baldwin, we're going to take this second commercial break, and we'll be back with our audience following this very, very short commercial break.
All right.
So,
All right.
yeah. So. Black Lives Matter. And now you want to know, where do we go from here?
Where are we going from here? Is the movement going to sustain itself, or is it just a fad?
Well, it looks like it has already sustained itself from the very, very beginning.
Worldwide media attention.
Yeah, from slavery. It's just wider. You see, I think
Black bodies are important, I think. And as long as there's police brutality, the movement would exist.
Yeah, you talk about police brutality and whatever, and then you think about Willie Lynch.
Yeah.
You know, that's,
exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I got a lot of stuff out on the internet dealing with Willie Lynch.
Oh, you
I got
do?
the whole Willie Lynch letter, man. You'd be surprised if you ever go out there and see that, man. I got the whole...
I got to check that out.
Yes, sir. Life and Times of Willie Lynch.
Okay.
Yes, about almost 18 hours of it. Yes. I'm surprised how they kept it out there, but you know.
Okay.
That's from Dockery, I think. Yeah.
Who is that?
That's Dockery, my second guess. Reuben Dockery.
Okay.
You might know him, I think.
I think I know him, yeah.
He's going to talk about some. Thank you and welcome back to the final segment of the show for today. We're talking to Dr. LBaldwin, and he's giving us some information in reference to the contemporary Black Lives Matter movement, and he's also giving us information in reference to the historical aspect of that movement. So, Dr. Baldwin, let's, during this last segment, pick up and give you an opportunity to try to bring in as much information as you possibly can during this last segment to highlight what we're talking about here, dealing with the so-called Black Lives Matter movement, the contemporary version of that movement.
I think we have to consider the question of where that movement goes from here. I think it is an extension of the civil rights movement, because if you look at the civil rights movement, Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X and Ella Baker, John Lewis, they all raised the question of the preservation, the value of black bodies. And I think that the Black Lives Matter movement is building on that, and I think it's going to continue to be a major movement because it has attracted worldwide media. It's a movement that, as I said earlier, is respected around the world. There are 23 chapters, one in Canada, there's one in Ghana. So I think the movement will continue to blossom and evolve because there will be...
the issues are always the same, no matter where you go. It's always the deprivation of young African-American males.
African-American lives.
So I guess, wherever.
Yeah,
you know.
Every 48 hours, there's some black male, woman, or child murdered by vigilantes, by hate groups, or by policemen. So that movement, I think, will blossom. And I think because of social media, because of the internet, it will become as important, this is my prediction, as the civil rights movement. When you talk about 700 demonstrations that have occurred since 2013 up to this point in connection with the Black Lives Matter movement, you're talking about a major movement. So we need to move away from this idea that the Black Lives Matter movement is a slogan, that it is a rallying cry, to develop a sense of it as a movement. And as long as black lives are in jeopardy because of poverty, because of racism, because of economic injustice, you're going to have a Black Lives Matter movement. It's a historical movement with an unbroken tradition, and I think we have to keep that in mind.
And it's still dealing with the same basic question in reference to the subjects.
Exactly.
In reference to this movement. No matter where you look,
exactly,
as you've already explained in American history, you're going to find out the same problems,
exactly,
the same deprivation, the same lynchings, the same burnings, and all of those things that happen. And so, yes.
Throughout our history. And Malcolm and Martin spoke boldly to this issue of police brutality. So when we hear people like Alicia Garza and Patrice Cullors and Oprah Tometi, who are the leaders of this Black Lives Movement, they are simply echoing what Martin and Malcolm and Ella Baker and Rosa Parks and others were saying about the sacredness of black bodies and the need to protect black bodies, not only against police brutality, but against these other problems that you raise, such as poverty and economic injustice.
Yes, because if Black Lives Matter dealing with police brutality, they also matter dealing with the inability of African American males to find jobs,
exactly.
the inability of them to find health.
Yes.
And so it covers the whole thing.
Yes, it spills over into drug addiction, it spills over into teenage pregnancy and other problems that have sort of become prominent in the black community. It's all about the vulnerability of black life. Whether you're talking about economic issues or social issues or cultural issues, the question is, how do we preserve the sacredness, the dignity and worth of black life?
And through all this period, Dr. Baldwin, from the very, very beginning, from slavery on up until now, we're still dealing with the same basic subjects.
Exactly.
And no matter whether you find them in slavery, or whether you find them in modern urban America, they're the same young men between about 16 and 25 or 30 years old that are receiving the attention of this movement in a real sense. And so
it's a problem that is epidemic in our society, and if we don't deal with it, we're going to suffer tragic consequences, and we're already suffering tragic consequences.
And I just want to let you know, Dr. Baldwin, you're doing a great work in terms of making us realize the importance of this movement, because I've seen it on television and I've seen people with signs saying Black Lives Matter. And even though I've been involved in this activity for the longest, I've never thought in terms of this being a part of something that was traditional. I've always known of protests, the NAACP and all other organizations that have protested, anti-lynching movements, and I think you've mentioned all of those, but I never was able to put it together as you are able to put it together here, and to indicate that this is indeed not a recent movement, even though you talk about the contemporary Black Lives Matter movement, that it's contemporary only because it is now which contemporary is, but it also has its historical roots in something that's very, very important.
Yeah, it's a part of an ongoing struggle.
And I certainly appreciate you, as I think we're getting ready for our final words for today, and I certainly appreciate you bringing us by that information and to encourage us, to let us know that there is an historical foundation, and those who might wish to become involved in this movement can continue to become so involved. And so I'm sort of wondering about where we are now. Is this it? Oh, good. We're good. I didn't know. I think
well then I think what we have to do is if you're interested in the Black Lives Matter movement, you have to become a part of social media. And not only social media, but a part of a movement, because the killing of black men, women, and children will continue. That's not going to stop. As I said earlier, that every 28 hours, according to some statistics, some black woman, male, child, killed by vigilante, police, or hate groups. And we know about the Klan and the neo-Nazis and the Aryan nations and paramilitary groups, all of which promote a kind of racist theology, a racist philosophy. So the Black Lives Matter movement, in my view, will continue to grow and will continue to thrive, because you have the foundation for that kind of thing.
And so in a real sense, the whole movement is not only a continuation, but more people can become involved in such a movement, and it's more and it's a greater recognition of what is going on in reference to the African American
community
within the African American community.
Now, I think we have to go back to this principle of the sacredness of black life, which is not only embodied in Scripture but in our Constitution. we all have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And if we really believe in the sacredness, the dignity, and worth of human life, then we will become a part of this Black Lives Matter movement. Because this is what it's all about. It's not only about protecting the sacredness and the dignity of black life, it's about protecting the sacredness and dignity of life in general.
That's exactly it. And so it's much greater than black people. It's how we treat one another. Yes.
Each other. And if we're a country that claims to be a Christian nation, that claims to be wedded to the principles of the Constitution, then we'll take that seriously.
And so in a real sense, this is part of what you might call the civil rights movement, because civil rights...
I think it's an extension of the civil rights movement, because as I said earlier, when you look at the civil rights leaders in the 50s and 60s, they were dealing with police brutality, police misconduct. Malcolm X spoke extensively to the Black Panther Party, King, Ella Baker, Fannie Lou Hamer. All of these leaders were concerned about police brutality and the intrusion of Klan elements into the police department. So I think we have to consider that in the larger context of what we are talking about.
Very good. And of course, Dr. Baldwin, let me thank you for coming by and giving us that excellent information. And let me also encourage our audience to tune in again next week for another informative edition of Comments. Thank you and good morning.